is that the FBI was investigating a $10 million bribe from Egyptian dictator el-Sisi to Donald Trump in cash. And that bribe came along around the same time that Donald Trump loaned his own campaign $10 million, or maybe gave it. I'd have to go back and look. And then Donald Trump made el-Sisi one of the first people he invited to the White House. One of the first countries he visited was Egypt. Stuff that had never happened before. I mean, you know, he's sucking up to a dictator, a guy who took over his country in the face of a military coup and now runs it with an absolute iron fist. Typically, American presidents first reach out to other small d democratic nations, not dictatorships. So here we have an apparent bribe that was being investigated by the FBI. And then when Bill Barr found out about it, Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr shut down the investigation. Now, this is very much like what Bill Barr did for George Herbert Walker Bush back in 1992 when he was also Attorney General for Bush the Elder. Most people don't even realize that Bill Barr was Attorney General twice. And what he did on Christmas Eve, 1992, was notorious. I mean, it was a huge story at the time. It was the reason Bill Barr kind of went underground for 20 years and just went back into private practice. Was that the special counsel, was that Walsh? Yeah, it was Walsh. The special counsel Walsh had identified a campaign diary, a diary from 1980 that was in the possession of George Herbert Walker Bush that made reference, apparently, to the Lieutenant Governor, Ben Barnes of Texas, having flown to Paris to meet with representatives of Ayatollah Khomeini to cut a deal where they would supply Iran with spare parts for the American-made F-16s that Iran had, because, you know, the Shah had been getting all his weaponry from the United States, that we would give them all these spare parts and new bombs for their planes, you know, new missiles, in exchange for them holding the hostages during the Carter presidency. And they did. They held them for, I believe it was 444 days. They released them to the minute when Ronald Reagan raised his hand to take the oath, with his other hand on the Bible, to take the oath of office. That was the moment that they released the hostages, by way of saying, hey, Reagan, we kept our deal. So Bill Barr was, so here we are 12 years later in 1992, and Lawrence Walsh, the special counsel, has narrowed it down, and he knows where the documents are that will prove not only that Reagan and his people, principally Bill Casey, had conspired with the Iranians to hold the hostages and defeat Carter, deny Carter the presidency, a second term, but also that George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, that he knew about it. And so Bush was under subpoena. He had to deliver this paper, and he had to deliver it, you know, the last week of December of 1992. Now, this was a month after he had lost the election to Bill Clinton. So he's a lame duck president on his way out, and he's been subpoenaed. And the court has ordered him to turn over documents that will prove the whole Iran-Contra thing was, you know, a stolen election and treason. So he goes to his Attorney General, Bill Barr, and says, what do I do? And Bill Barr says, pardon everybody. Pardon Caspar Weinberger. Pardon, you know, there was 5 pardons altogether. These 5 guys had all been convicted of this crime of working with the Iranians to help block the election of Jimmy Carter. They had been convicted. They hadn't been sentenced yet, but they had just been convicted. And up next was George Herbert Walker Bush. He was going to be convicted. And so Bill Barr said, pardon them all, and that's what George Herbert Walker Bush did. And thus, on Christmas Day, 1992, December 25th, a screaming 3-line, all-caps headline in the Washington Post, you know, Prosecutor Walsh yells cover up, Bush pardons Weinberger and 4 others an ends Iran-Contra investigation. I'm paraphrasing from memory here. So here we have in Bill Barr, arguably certainly the most corrupt attorney general of my lifetime, arguably the most corrupt attorney general in the history of America. And now it turns out that he also shut down this investigation into Donald Trump taking a $10 million bribe from the dictator of Egypt. Keep in mind, Spiro Agnew had to retire from the White House because it came out that he had taken $1 million bribe, just $1 million, from the mob when he was the governor of New Jersey. He had to leave the White House. He had to resign because it was, found that he hadn't even been convicted. It was just, hey, here's the evidence. But Trump is still running for president.